Hello, I'm John Hind, the Director of Compass Resolution, and today I have the pleasure and the privilege of talking to Belinda Jones. Belinda is an accredited family mediator, a divorce coach, a direct child consultant, and a parent coordinator. Today we'll be talking about her role as a direct child consultant as we focus our discussions on the voice of the child in the mediation process. Hi, Belinda. Good to have you with me today.
Hello, John. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. So Belinda and I will be spending about 30 minutes today talking about the role of the direct child consultant and the support she provides separating parents who are using the mediation to sort out child arrangements. Our hope is that by the end of this conversation, you'll have a clear understanding of the service, why it's so important, and how to work with Belinda as you go through the mediation process. So, Belinda, can we maybe start, a good place to start is a little bit of legal context when we think about the children's rights when parents separate?
Sure, absolutely. Well, we're all guided by the Children Act and the paramountcy principle, which is that the welfare and the well-being of a child is paramount. So that informs all mediations surrounding child arrangements, whether or not we speak directly to the child or not. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child states that children have a right to be consulted when arrangements are made in their best interests. And that is why at times it can be really helpful to speak to a child on behalf of their parents in order for them to be able to feedback their thoughts and feelings about their circumstances, because obviously divorce is a very difficult time for the children of that family just as much as it is for the parents.
Yeah, so there's kind of this recognition of the importance of the children's wishes and feelings, their voice in when their parents are separating, when their family is going through this, is recognised at that kind of pretty high level, human rights level.
Absolutely. I think it's also important that children have a right to information as well. That's part of the direct consultation.
Yeah.
That obviously children aren't going to be making decisions about where they live. The parents will be making those decisions on their behalf. But it can be helpful for children to understand the environment that they're in and where there are sources of help for them, just as much as it is for parents. A mediator will always be referring parents to different resources that might be helpful to them, and so that can be helpful for children too. We tend to use the age of sort of a 10-year-old as the age above which it would be pretty much automatically sensible for a child to be offered direct consultation. Any children under that age, really we'd be looking at their ability to understand their circumstances and to be able to feed information forward. And certainly younger siblings in the family who are under 10 would certainly be sensibly aged for a direct consultation.
So is that 10-year-old, that has something to do, I guess, with their psychological and emotional development, their ability, their maturity. I mean, in legal terms, I think we hear about Gillick competency and so on and so forth. I mean, for a child of normal development.
Yes, absolutely. So that's something that we would explore with parents in an initial mediation session, really, whether they felt that their children would want to speak to someone. Sometimes children have maybe been involved with other professionals already, and the last thing they want to do is speak to a further professional. But we would be exploring with parents what they think the child's thoughts on the process would be, first of all, and then obviously we would, well, I can talk a little bit more later about the process itself.
Yeah.
But yes, it's very much about the age appropriateness and their
yeah. I suppose the main point at the moment, as we both know in our work as mediators, it's very easy and very understandable as well for parents when they're in the throes of divorce, separation, talking about difficult matters, to lose sight actually of the children's needs and actually what the children talk this need for the kids to have information, to know what's going on. It can, as we all know how disempowering can feel to be kept in the dark. So
it totally is. And I think also children, I think what we often miss, certainly in the earlier stages of separation, is that children are watching everything. They're processing what's going on around them. They're very much keen to understand what it matters, what their parent separation means for them. But on top of that, if we're not careful, sometimes children start to caretake a parent, or they start to side with or align with one parent because they feel that's what they ought to be doing. So it's very helpful also just to make sure that we separate what's going on for the adults with what's going on for the children, because it's not usually exactly the same thing.
Yeah, no, yes, indeed, it can have an enormous impact. So so we've talked about the need for the child to, in many cases, to feel not kept in the dark, kept informed, and perhaps have a voice in the mediation process. So, what does a direct child consultant do? I mean, I've introduced you as a direct child consultant, and what maybe help our viewers understand what that role might be, direct child consultant.
Well, I suppose, well, first of all, the beginning part of that role would be exploring with parents a little bit about what the child's like, what their interests are, how they understand their child's experience of the separation so far, and just gathering a little bit of the parent's perspective of the child. Obviously, no child is going to just speak to a complete stranger and open up about everything they want to talk about straight off, in a 20-minute session, for example. So we would first of all gather a little bit of information so that we have something to start to talk to the children about when we meet them. Next step is, of course, just to work out where we're going to meet the children. That has to be somewhere where they feel comfortable. It's often school. It's often done by Zoom nowadays, because children, obviously, particularly any child that's been through the pandemic, they're more than used to working online, and often they prefer it. That it's just their norm. It's not necessarily ours, but it's certainly theirs. So once we've worked out we've done the whole procedural element to direct child consultancy, which we can come to later. Really, it's just about talking to the child about, or children, together and separately, about their life, their feelings, how things are going for them, what school's like, what their friendships are like, because quite often those sorts of things are where you can see how a child is faring anyway. And then we would just ask general questions about how they view their circumstances and what their experiences are, within the family. The last thing we would do is ask them where they want to live and how many days or nights they want to spend with each parent. That's not their role, and that's something that we're very clear with parents about in the preparation stages, and very definitely clear with the child or children as well. Is we're just trying to understand, to report back to their parents what their feelings are. I think at this stage it's really important to make sure a child understands that both parents want to hear what they genuinely feel. I think that's probably the most important element of direct child consultation, because the child then comes out feeling empowered, feeling heard and listened to. We make it clear to the child that they're not going to choose what happens, that their parents might not be able to follow through with everything that they're asking for, because that's life, isn't it? But it's I think it's very empowering for a child to feel that both parents together are on the same page about wanting to understand what's going on for them.
And I guess that, to a large extent, with many children at that age, you're helping them to be clear with them in themselves about what they're wanting, because I imagine it can be a very confusing time for many kids, and to speak to someone who they know is speaking to their parents, so they know you are a conduit, maybe and so on, and also you're helping them as an expert facilitator, communicator, to enabling them to express themselves as well. So that can feel quite
that's a big part of it. Once so that any child in direct child consultation, they have got the same rights to confidentiality that adults have in the mediation process. So the first thing we do is open the discussion with them and try to draw out how they're feeling about their lives. But then the next very important step is to process with them what they want to say to their parents. So quite often they might not want to say everything that they said to the consultant to their parents, and certainly we help them to road test how they're going to what they want to say and how they're going to say it. Obviously, we've generally done either working with another mediator if we've just come in as the consultant, or we would have done it ourselves if we're the consultant and also mediator. Is sort of road testing with the parents first of all, what their responses might be to different circumstances, for example. So our role is very much then about being mindful of what a child wants to say to their parents and how that might be received. That's very much part of our role, is not to manage what's said, but at the same time to support a child, to draw out from them what they feel that they want to say, and what what they do not wish to report back. And if a child says something that they don't want their parents to hear, then it isn't reported back. That's their confidentiality.
Yeah, I mean, those boundaries, those principles of confidentiality, I guess, are really important. Just as they are when we're mediating with parents, it's important for the children to know that it gives them a sense, I guess, of security and safety, that they can say things to you, and in the knowledge that actually it's not going to leak out to the parents unless they want it to. And that's a really important part of it, I'm sure. Yeah. Can you think of any kind of situations where, in your experience, where the kids have, where the parents and the children have really benefited from the service we're talking about, which is you talking to the children and feeding it back in.
Yes, I think quite often where certainly where there's maybe a degree of disagreement between parents about what's in a child's best interest, perhaps parents are sharing care of the children already, but it's just the practicalities in terms of where and when and the travel between houses, and if a child is saying something different to each parent, then both parents are reasonably expect that what the child's saying to them makes is what they want to see happen, but of course they're saying something different. We have to be very careful in these circumstances because there are lots of contraindications, I suppose, in terms of direct child consultation. If you felt that one parent was using the process to manipulate a child into saying something, then that would be a reason for a mediator to not engage in that process. The part of our assessment, just as our assessment for appropriateness and suitability for mediation at the MIAM stage, is to try to do our absolute utmost to make sure that direct child consultant generates a better circumstance for the child at the end of the process, and that we don't in any way do any harm through that process.
I can see that as being really important. I'm just thinking about the kind of cases that I might have been involved in where the parents would have really benefited from. And you talked about this one classic scenario where both parents are very honest and with great intent, saying that they're the child that's been going backwards and forwards between them, whether it's a daughter or a son of a certain age, often young teenagers, are saying different things to them. What might be some good reasons for that? I mean, from your experience, why might children be saying different things?
Children, well, I think as we referred to earlier, children watch everything, they see everything. So they see their parents going through very difficult circumstances, and they might adopt certain behaviours that the parents aren't even aware that they're doing. If they are, for example, looking out for their parents' best interests and saying something because they don't want to upset a parent. It's part of our preparation for direct child consultation is to work with parents to road test how they'd feel if the children did say something different to what they'd been saying to them, and how they would receive it, and obviously making sure that they don't quiz the children afterwards. There's no sort of emotional fallout if a child says something that they weren't expecting or didn't especially want to hear, and so assuming that process is all run smoothly in the lead into direct child consultation, then really the optimum outcome is that a child is able to honestly say how they feel. It's obviously very good for a child's mental health to feel that that in the course of all of the chaos emotional fallout that might be happening around them, that their parents are focused on their needs and well-being, and not just on the crises that they're weathering themselves. So I suppose examples of cases where it's worked really well is where a child has been able to say something, that's empowered them. It's always one of the best parts of your work as a mediator is working with children. They're very honest, and they're very grateful to have been given the opportunity. That those that obviously consent, that's another issue. And that are in the process in the first place. And I think that it really benefits the parents, because sometimes they are surprised at what their children said. And normally there are quite often a lot of very moving messages. Quite often that, your feedback might start with, I love both of you very much. I can see what's happening. I know you're both having a difficult time. These are the things that matter to me. And sometimes it can be, I suppose, one of the most rewarding parts of working as a mediator is just seeing how, I suppose, yes, just that you can sort of sense the warmth and affection for, all of the different family members through the process.
Yeah, and when two parents really want to protect their kids and they just want to work together, but there is this resistance, these differences. And I know as you're talking, I'm also thinking about one of the worst places for a child to be in is this caught in the middle, in a conflict zone, in their knowing that their parents have such different views or want different things, and sometimes I imagine, and you're the expert here, children just want to say, for God's sake, mum and dad, just sort it out. And
I think quite often they do. Yes, that's often the message: is this is your issue. Don't make time. That's very, very much, where the honesty can sometimes come from. And I suppose what we, as mediators, what we bring, particularly direct child consultants, is the understanding that being caught in conflict between your parents when you're the subject of the conflict is one of the most psychologically damaging situations for a child to be in. So, if two parents are able to come together and honour the process, in as much as, you know, listen to what their child has to say, and reflect genuinely, you know, on what the child said afterwards when they're making their arrangements. And it's, you know, it's very empowering to hear what a child says. That can support people to do that in a different way, because it's not what the other parent's telling you, it's actually coming from the child.
It can be really motivating, I mean, for parents. It can really help parents dig deep in a very difficult situation when they're listening to each other and finding it so difficult. They're being triggered left, right, and centre, but when they know the damage that's being done to the kids, something that enables some parents, a lot of parents actually, to
Quite a lot of parents, because I think what they have in common, you know, that they might be going through a process of understanding what they no longer have in common. What they always genuinely or generally always have in common is a love for their children and the desire for them to, you know, to grow into healthy, happy adults. And so sometimes that process can just be a reminder when, you know, when you're going through you know, extreme life events yourself as parents, you know, just to remember that you know, it is slightly different for the children, and that, you know, as soon as we're able to come back to thinking about their best interests, you know, the sooner we can do that, the better.
As we're making this point, I guess we ought to make this point also to our viewers, this distinction that, I mean, may mean nothing to parents, but it does to us as professionals. This difference between child inclusive conversation in terms of mediation, and child-centered conversation. So when they hear that, what are we talking? What are you talking about when we talk about child-centered and child inclusive?
So the child-centered is, I suppose, any mediation session which is held to discuss arrangements for the children, a mediator will always be trying to drill down to what's going on for the child, what's the child saying to each parent, and if the child is saying different things to each parent, it's likely that would emerge in a mediation session. And then the mediator would always be saying, what do you think is actually going on then? Because, you know, you've heard two different accounts of the same often event, or, you know, some sort of circumstance. So we would always, as mediators anyway, be looking at, you know, trying to explore what's going on for the child, and bringing both parents' separate perspectives into the room, because of course once we're separated we don't really know what's going on for the child when they're at the other house, and all we can do is fill in the gaps, and we don't necessarily always do that accurately. I suppose direct child consultation is very much more about bringing the child's voice into the mediation session. So we would try to use the children's phraseology wherever possible. Sometimes they'll write it out so that, you know, the parents will see their handwriting. So it's very much the child's voice, and free of any other influence, just trying to bring that voice and then moving on from that in a session. So normally, if we've had a direct child consultation, we'll try and speak to the parent shortly afterwards. It's not really in anyone's best interest to leave that situation hanging when, you know your child's spoken to someone but you don't know what they've said. So sometimes that can be very soon afterwards, but certainly within 36 hours, for example. And the consultant will mention at the beginning of a mediation session what the child has said. And then if it was a different consultant and it's not the mediator that's running the session, then they would probably leave the session then, so that we're not having conversations about what else the child has said. Once the child's voice has bin heard, then the most important thing to do in that session afterwards is for the mediator to support both parents to discuss, how much of that they already knew, what they were surprised at hearing, how they want to take that on board, what they can and can't do in terms of practical responses to what the child said. So
what difference has made to their thinking, what they're going to plan, what they're prepared to do now, and so on. And so it does seem to me that this kind of this child inclusive process we're talking about, and using you as a direct child consultant, can be so powerful. So my question really, my curious brain is thinking, why so few of them? Why are parents not grabbing this opportunity? Where are the barriers? What are some of the reasons you're hearing that parents saying, well, we're not so keen on that?
Well, there are some very good reasons, I think. Certainly, the vast majority of I think the average age of children going through, a separation is often under 10. I think it's around about the age of 7. So quite a lot of children are just too young. So that first of all will exclude a fair number of children. The level of conflict between two parents is also a very important factor, and a mediator would be assessing for that at the MIAM stage, but also when working with both parents together at the initial mediation stage, where we would be looking at making the arrangements, discussing whether it was in the child's best interest or not. The mediator would have to road test with both parents how they would receive that information, whether they would be able to not quiz the child or shame the child in some way for saying something that supported that, what they didn't agree with. So there's, I think, if you find that there is a case with extremely high conflict, for example, where one parent is concerned that the other parent is manipulating the child or coaching the child in some way, then if that genuinely is the case, then mediation wouldn't be suitable. So that the role of the mediator is to work.
I mean, I can think of many mediations where at least one of the parents is extremely sensitive, defensive to feeling undermined, criticized, and so on. And so I can imagine that parent, if they're not hearing what they want to hear from the person who's seen their child, how they can then go, the temptation must be enormous to want to go back to that child to get validation. Why do you say that? How can you say that? And I can see that.
I think it's it's important. I think maybe a sort of a barrier that is very real, but it can be sort of dismantled. It can just be actually that your children are, generally the most precious, living beings that you could ever, you couldn't care more for anybody generally than about your children. So handing them, figuratively, to a complete stranger for them to talk about their most honest thoughts and feelings at a time when you're already feeling very vulnerable is a big ask of most parents. I think we're aware of that as mediators.
I've definitely had that a few times. Parents feel, as you say, very protective for the children, and I've heard some parents, of my clients I'm working with, I would feel, and sometimes they both agree, the parents, I'd feel that we don't want to involve our child in our decision making and so on, and also
it can feel like an implied criticism that we don't know our children well enough, they will have to go to someone else. So it very much depends, really. And so the role of the mediator in the initial parent session would be to draw out what each parent understands from the child is going on for them, what their emotional well-being, how they're supporting it, what the child's saying to each one. And I guess from those conversations we'd build on whether it might be helpful for a child to come and speak to a mediator. We just always have to be very careful when there's a child that's absolutely bursting to speak to a mediator. We just have to, we have to road test that a little bit and just make sure we understand why that is. But of course, in the cases that work, that we see and that work well, what you do see is an empowered young child that feels very respected and loved. So the process itself, if we can discuss all of the potential pitfalls with parents first of all, so that everybody is set up and understands the remit of the process, what it's there to do and what it's there not to do. It can be a very empowering and positive, future focused, I suppose, approach to looking after a child's best interest.
Yes, indeed, it can be very powerful. So I'm now working. So we're now going to talk about process. We're going to help the people who are watching this, parents perhaps who are hopefully watching this, or will be watching this. Not at the moment because we're recording, but hopefully in the future. So I'm working with two parents, and they both and they've got they've got a couple of kids, maybe one 14 and one 12 or 11. And they've decided, and the children want to as well, they've decided that they do want, the kids want to have this say, they want their voice. And so I would, not being a direct child consultant myself, my model is, as I think you've mentioned already, is to bring in you, Belinda. I bring in, so how might that work? Can you talk us through step by step, from the time my client parents have said, yes, we do want to, we finish the session now, or maybe it could be even the pre-mediation sessions, but how might it work step by step? Do you get a letter? How does it all work?
Okay. So first of all, in the initial session, the mediator will be discussing with the parents first of all, where the suitability and the procedures and gathering an understanding of the child to pass on to the mediator to have some knowledge of the child beforehand. And at that point, the mediator would be exploring with parents what the best practical steps would be. More often than not, the best way forward is for a child to maybe speak to the mediator online from a room at school when school's over, for example. That tends to be a good idea because it's a neutral place. The child doesn't feel overheard. you know, they're not sort of sitting in their bedroom feeling, you know, very exposed, that they're showing all of their personal, I don't know, the bands they like, that kind of thing. So the child's put in a place of a sort of empowerment, but neutrality in terms of when they speak to the mediator. So we would just be looking at the practicalities of who the contacts were at school, for example, where they'd be, whether the child has any sort of neurodivergent needs, and whether they needed to have someone with them in the room, and who that would be. And then in that case, we would be looking at sort of signing the confidentiality agreement, that sort of thing. Once we had that information, the first thing we would need is consent from both parents. So direct child consultation can't go ahead if both parents don't consent to it, and that's part of the road testing of how you'd respond to the process afterwards. Once that's happened, then the direct child consultant would then send a letter to the child or children, inviting them, and just basically putting in sort of age appropriate language, saying that we're helping your mum and dad to make some big decisions about what they're going to do next, and they would really like to hear what your thoughts are on how things, on how you feel about things. So we'd love to know, here's my number, would you text and let me know? So we give the child a way of letting us know whether they want to or not. Assuming they say yes, then we would need the child's consent as well. Everybody has to consent to it. It's the confidentiality is embedded in that whole process. And so then we would set up a date and time, and we try and schedule that rather with the timing of the feedback to the parents. So quite often you might find that you speak to a child at 3:30 in the afternoon in school before they went home. The parents would have to make those arrangements, and we'd road test, making sure that the child felt safe and secure after they'd had that session. And then maybe shortly afterwards, we would speak to the parents and do that feedback, so that it's all relatively contained. So nobody's left hanging after that process, neither the parents nor the child, because obviously the child might be also wondering what will happen next once they've had that chance to speak. And so once the consultant has fed back to parents, then they would generally leave that mediation session, and then it would return back to the mediator, who's also heard this information generally for the first time or just heard it beforehand. The mediator isn't privy to anything extra that the child has said. It's just the feedback that the child wants the parents to focus on. And so then the session after that would be about focusing on how they are going to jointly approach what the child said.
I guess it really provides that focus, doesn't it? If you've got the children saying something, the parents are more often than not that'll provide a real focus for the conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And in my experience, once that process has come to an end, parents are generally relieved to have heard some, I've not had a circumstance where a child's not had something very positive to say to their parents, but also something important to say. I think I so far in my experience that we tend to leave those sessions sort of with everybody feeling a little bit empowered, and certainly reassured that that everybody is doing the best they can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Costs, because at the moment, isn't the government providing? So if I'm working with two parents and they're trying to work out child arrangements and so on, and they're talking about and involving the children, with you and so on, aren't the government giving out vouchers at the moment?
Yeah, so they're not giving any supplementary funding for child inclusive mediation, but at the moment the government has a £500 voucher scheme. So that doesn't pay towards the initial MIAM appointments, but that's the case for all mediations that are related to discussions around children. But that £500 voucher is shared equally between both parents, and that can certainly go towards almost a significant amount of the fees for a direct child consultation. Yeah. You only have the one extra session, the mediator is speaking with the.
The chances are the mediator's cost is going to, and the direct child consultant's cost is going to come to more than that. So actually, it's a nice little contribution from the country or from the government, from taxpayers, whatever, to helping these parents resolve things for themselves, which is actually, this is a big picture, isn't it? Helping parents stay away from the courts, avoiding litigation, keeping it the whole thing more human-based, more conversational, keeping the parents in the decision-making important, really
Absolutely,
important decision-making.
absolutely. I think we're all, as mediators, hearing more and more that when applications are made to court, if there aren't any safeguarding concerns, quite often
Yeah,
because the magistrates are sending people back to mediation these days. So
yeah.
if it is at all possible to reach an agreement in mediation where you're both where the conversation is slowed down enough to be able to take on board what the other parent is thinking and also what the child is thinking, then you're the most likely possible to come to an outcome that you all look back in years to come and think, you know, we did our best there, you know, and nobody's looking back with regret, wishing that they'd been able to spot something sooner, because that obviously is a risk for all of us.
And all we need is the parents and ourselves, actually, as mediators, professionals, to do our best. We expect them to do the best, and then we can work with them. Okay, so let's assume that I'm working with parents, and I want to get you involved. Well, obviously, you are on my company's website. You're part of a really valuable, fantastic support team on Compass resolution. But if they wanted to contact you directly, or another mediator watching this wants to contact you directly, how do they get hold of you? How do they contact you?
Well, as you said, absolutely, I'm on the Compass website, and I also run my own mediation service, and that's Cambridge Family Matters. So you can be able to contact me through my website.
That's www.cambridgefamilymatters.co.uk. Yeah, fantastic.
.com.
Oh, .com. Thank you. But don't get it wrong. Because we need people to help you. Belinda, this has been really useful for me, fantastic for me, and thank you so much for your time. And hopefully, you guys out there, I'm looking at you. I hope you're watching this, and I hope you find it helpful as well. We don't do these sessions just for the fun of it for ourselves. We hope they're useful and they're and sharing this information and understanding. So we hope it's been great. So Belinda, thank you very much for your time. I know you're really busy. So thanks for sharing your information, your knowledge, your experience, and so on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
I'll see you very soon. Bye.